welcome back to another video. Tonight we are talking about settings. Now I've had it a few times on older videos when I used to shoot more at night, asking about what's the best settings for night. Well, that's like asking what's the best settings for portrait, because there are no two situations that require exactly the same settings. Depending on what it is you're going to shoot will very much determine what your settings will be. Now what I mean by that is if you're shooting long exposures, of course, you don't really have to worry about ISO because you can have your ISO at base and everything is controlled by your shutter speed. If you're shooting, portraits in the city at night, as I was recently, you're going to want to keep that shutter speed at a point where you're going to freeze motion, but then you've got to kind of just let your ISO go and, hopefully your camera can handle it. And on top of this, no matter what system you're using, you're going to want a fast lens if you are going to be shooting in the dark, because things can get messy quite quickly if you don't. Right, so what I've decided to do, since I use cameras from Micro Four Thirds through APS-C and full frame, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of how I set things up. And it's kind of I'm not going to call it a complete guide, because if I call it a complete guide, somebody's going to crucify me in the comments because I've forgotten something. It's kind of an almost complete guide to setting up your camera or cameras in the dark. So the plan tonight is I've got with me the Sony a7R II, which is a full frame, 42 megapixels, pretty decent at high ISO. And I've also got the Olympus EM1 Mark II with me, which is a Micro Four Thirds. Again, it's not terrible with high ISO, but you definitely do notice a difference. So this is where your settings are definitely going to change depending on which camera you're going to use. Right, I've just taken two photographs here at the marina, just of the boats. There's some fun lights and whatnot in the background. One of the shots was taken with the Sony a7R II and the 85mm f1.8. The other shot was taken with the Olympus EM1 Mark II and the 45mm f1.8, both set at 1.8. I kind of tried to match up the framing, but it doesn't match exactly, but that's not important. Now, this isn't the only way to shoot this particular shot. Now, if your shot has no movement in it, or if the movement within the shot doesn't really affect it in a negative way, then your settings can completely change. That handheld shot at f1.8 and 12,800 ISO could become a tripod shot at, say, f4 or f5.6 and maybe 800 ISO. So there is a big difference in the settings depending on what it is you're going to shoot, even in the same sort of ambient light setting. Okay, so this is the Sony shot. I cropped it 4:3 to better match the EM1's ratio and to get rid of that little bit of fence. As you can see here, it was shot at 12,800 ISO, and there is some noise in the picture, but it will clean up nicely. This camera is pretty good with high ISOs, and I've shot at 12,800 before and it cleans up pretty well. This is the EM1 Mark II shot, and this was shot at 6400 ISO because I didn't realise at the time that this is where the auto ISO caps out, so it's one stop darker, and as you can see there is noise in there as well. But again, it will clean up quite nicely. Alright, so I'm taking both shots again, with Olympus and with the Sony. This time though, I'm not at 1.8 on both of these lenses. I've shot it at f4 and I've got the ISO at base, and I'm using that shutter speed and I'm taking it down as far as it needs to go in order to get a correct exposure. This is going to show some movement in the water, but other than that, the image should still look just as good and just as well exposed. Right, so this is the Sony shot, and I knocked the tripod, or the wind got the tripod, so this one's a little bit shaky, but as you can see at base ISO, there is very little evidence of any noise in this. It is very clean. But yeah, the main difference between these shots and the handheld shots is obviously the texture of that water. Now this is the Olympus shot, and again, same thing, base ISO, nice and clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the handheld Olympus shot and this long exposure side by side, so you can see the differences. city setting, of course, you do have a lot of artificial light kicking around, so this is going to affect your exposure, and depending on where in the city you are, that ambient light is going to be at different levels. But what happens if we go somewhere that's actually dark? Okay, we're coming out of the city. We are now in the sticks, and it is proper dark and also proper cold. There's ice on the ground and I'm not enjoying it, so I'm not staying out here too long. Now the plan was to get an Astro shot using the Olympus M1 Mark II and the 9mm f1.7, but the clouds rolled in as we've got out here. There are still a few stars visible, and I'm still going to do a night sky shot, but whether it'll be any good or not is anyone's guess. But the settings will still apply, so let's get on with that. All right, so I've just set up on this road. It does still get quite a bit of traffic, so what I'm hoping for is a car coming from that direction, so I get the tail lights going down this road. My settings are quite simple. I've opened up this 9mm to 1.7 just to get as much light in there as possible. The ISO is up at 1600, and it's a 5-second exposure from the test shot, and everything's looking good. There is a car coming down now, so I'm going to fire off a shot. It's on a 2-second timer, and hopefully the light trails will fill the entire shot. That's a lot of light. I don't know that I like it. That's quite possibly not the best shot I've ever taken in the world, but once I've had a play with it in the computer, if it's any good, I'll put it on screen now. So we've just set up out the side of the road here. I've got these two big old trees on the left side of the frame. The centre of the second tree is like right on the third. And then we've got the open night sky behind it all, and it all looks pretty good. All right, as regards settings, I'm set for 10 seconds, f1.7 to open up that lens as wide as it'll go to get as much light in as possible. ISO 1600. Now I could bring the ISO down and increase that shutter speed, but there is some movement in those branches and I don't want it to be too distracting in the shot. 10 seconds I think looks pretty decent, so I'm going to leave it at that. And here's the shot. All right, so in summary, there are no best settings for night shooting. It's very, very situational, as it is with all things in photography. You know, you're not going to say what's the best portrait settings. It's just not a thing. You adapt to the situation, you know, however much you're in control of the light, all those kind of things, the lens you're using and everything. It all affects the way you're going to expose for the shot. At night time though, if you want a too long didn't read kind of thing, if you shoot into freeze motion, you're going to need your shutter speed as high as it's going to be to freeze whatever it is you want to freeze, and then just let the ISO go, because that's all you really can do, and have as fast a lens as you possibly have. When you're doing long exposures, the ISO then comes all the way down and your shutter speed controls everything. And in a situation like this where it's true dark, you need all the help you can get. So you're going to need a fast lens, you're going to need a long shutter speed, and you're probably going to have to bump your ISO. So just bear all those things in mind when it comes to shooting at night. And again, everything, it's not just the camera, it's the lens, it's the situation, it's whether you've got any light, whether you can use light, all of these things all come into play. So there are no best settings. It's just, you know, take some test shots and see what you get. All right, thank you very much for watching. I am absolutely freezing. I'm pretty sure Richard's absolutely freezing. So we are now going home because, frankly, I've had enough. I'll see you in the next one.